Hi, my name is Sam Reed, and what we'll be talking about today is it's titled History in Public Education. What we'll be talking about um, is how history is taught in public education today and what some of the misconceptions might be and how we can address those and fix those misconceptions. I'll just preface this by saying a lot of what is going to be in this lecture is actually the lecture I give my students when they start in one of my classes, either American history, American government, or 8th grade social studies, which again is just American history in the state of Nebraska. I start by asking them, what is history? And they often always respond with the same thing. Oh, history is the past. And I tell them, okay, the past of what? And they'll tell me, oh, it's the past of blah, 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 the past of us, the blah. And this just opens up dialogue, is all this is meant for. This isn't really to find an answer, it's to poke their brains. And I'll address that. History is not just simply the past. If history was just the past, we'd call history the past. Oh, I have to go to Past 101 today. I've got to go to American Past class. But that's not what it is. So let's dive deeper. We'll go to Herodotus, the father of history, ancient Greek historian. I almost said philosopher. I mean, you could argue he's a philosopher as well. Okay, what is Herodotus doing? Okay, Herodotus is telling a narrative of the past, often fictionalized. We hear stories about 1,000,000 Persians marching into Thermopylae, millions and millions of soldiers, and we know this not to be the case now. Okay, so we know that there's this fictionalized telling of the past, so maybe it's a story of the past, but one that's rooted in fact, at least with the modern conception. Now this is where we start to lean into some of the more truths of this discussion. Yes, history is narrative driven. The history of the United States is taught much differently in the United States than it is in more extremely North Korea, less extreme, the United Kingdom. So this is true. It is narrative driven, perspective driven, all of those things. And it is rooted in fact, hopefully. So I tell them, okay, is it as simple as a factual story being told? And they go, yeah, yep, history is a factual story being told. But then we start to think about some of the things that have shifted over time. And I ask them, okay, well, how were your parents taught about Christopher Columbus? And, some of the younger kids who don't talk to their parents because they're too busy being on their phones really don't have an answer to that question. But when we get to junior level, senior level, they have an answer to that question. They go, oh, well, my parents say that Christopher Columbus wasn't that bad and that people are just crazy now. And I go, okay, so there's been a shift in the way that we learn about him, correct? And they go, yeah. I go, well, if it was all about fact the whole time, why did this shift occur? And I go, oh, and for 8th graders, what I do is, if nobody responds to that question with the overwhelming, oh yeah, my parents say that, blah, 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 I'll show them Christopher Columbus Day turning into Indigenous Peoples Day. And they go, oh. And I say, well, it's always been about fact, right? And then I'll present them with his diary entry, which, if you haven't read, is where he talks about the Native Americans being the perfect slave. They'll do anything he says. If you put on today's lenses of ethics, it's morally reprehensible. And I don't insert any of that into the discussion. I just give it to them. And I say, well, if it's fact, this should always have been known, correct? And they go, oh, no. So what's going on here? And this is where I introduce what's going on. But to divert for a second, history as a narrative is always there. In the United States, it's always been a tool to kind of form common ground. I mean, you can look to Carl Jung for this, the rootedness in history, why history is important to root oneself in reality, so on and so forth. America's in a weird predicament in which, let's not get too contentious, but we're not forming an ethnogenesis perhaps, but we are forming a national genesis when we talk about history. The George Washington could never tell a lie, Betsy Ross telling that story to children. This is national pride being instilled in children. This is history in a nutshell. I'm sure Herodotus was doing the same thing when he talked about the 1,000,000 men being held off by 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. I'm sure it had the same qualities or effects. And we've seen this shift. To go back to Christopher Columbus, it's now known as Indigenous Peoples Day. However you feel about that, whatever. This shift, however, may have overcorrected. Now, instead of trying to build up this national pride that might be misguided entirely by misinformation, instead of building that up, we're building this revisionist history. Now, I'm not giving any ethical tag to that. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying that's good. I don't really care at the end of the day, because facts are still facts, and you can search for that on your own. And that's a little hint at what we're going to get to next. So this revisionist history is coming up, and now I have students who are talking about how, well, George Washington was no hero. He was a slave owner. He was evil. Okay, yeah, sure. You can have that perspective on history. That's fine. But that's going to take away from a lot of the other things that we're going to learn in this class. That's going to kind of shake up what you're doing if you're going to jump on that at the moment. But I let them have that. I let students have that feeling. Because if we venture from whatever the standards might be, a little bit, now we still got to hit our standards, but if we shift how we teach history and the purposes that we teach history for, all of this occurs. We still have these new findings of the history of oppression that this country's had, the history of intolerance that this country had. That can all thrive in a setting where we still learn about the perspective of national pride and the perspective of the great conquest of the West, and on one hand still understanding the travesty that occurred to the Native American population. We can have both. We can have our cake and eat it too if we shift the way we teach history. A lot of standards-based history is just a simple recital of dates, facts. That's it. We ensure that students know geography, understand economic systems, understand how these things work, understand that George Washington was the commander of the Virginia Regiment during the 7 Years' War. Yep, got it, good, boom. We have to rethink this. One way to promote engagement with our students is to give an individual approach to history, to individualize their education, individualize their intellectual growth in the history classroom. The best way to do this is through argument formation. Having students form arguments about historical concepts. This returns some autonomy to them in the lesson. They themselves are forming their own arguments, their own perspectives. They're journeying through history themselves. Now, I'm not a postmodernist. I don't believe in the relativism of truth itself. There is universal truth. We can argue with that later. So this autonomy in lessons still has to be rooted in fact, logic, all that good stuff, reason. Still using the empirical method, observable qualities, quantitative, qualitative, both of those. I don't want any postmodernist crap in my classroom, maybe in a philosophy class. Anywho, regardless, this autonomy in lesson is provided to them. So now they themselves are taking the paths to form an argument, to reason through scholarly articles, scholarly readings, primary sources, secondary sources, to make arguments themselves. And they can decide whether or not they subscribe to a more revisionist form of history, or if they still kind of want to hold on to the national pride narrative of history that we're presented with. And just by being transparent with them in the processes of history, they'll understand this on their own. And it gives a more unbiased approach to history. But it has to come from a shift in assessment and a shift in assignment. Oftentimes, teachers just give quizzes over who was the general of this battle, blah, 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 blah. Or what were the three things traded along the transatlantic slave trade route, so on and so forth. Yeah, I could snore at that now. It comes from shifting the assignment. One thing that I do is I introduce a CER, which is Claim, Evidence, and Reasoning assignment. This is done in one paragraph. Students are tasked with forming a claim, finding 3 pieces of evidence rooted in scholarly works that they can support that claim with, and then culminating it in 1 paragraph reasoning. The beauty about this assignment is that you can extend it to 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages, 5 pages, 1 paragraph, whatever you'd like. There's flexibility. You can make it formal, informal, however you'd like to do it. What this does is it gets their brains working. They're forming arguments. They're arguing with each other in class, which is a good thing. If you don't think it is, you're wrong. We can argue about it. They're arguing, they're debating. We'll get passionate writers Well, I had a student on this side, arguing with each other. They're writing about two different things. They debate each other, and now their papers are on fire. I tell students you're going to write a lot of papers in my class, and they sigh and they grunt. And then we start doing it, and there's that energy to it. This shift in assignment has to occur. We have to return autonomy to the students, and more than just allowing them what parameters they'll accept or what terms and conditions they'll accept. That isn't autonomy. We have to give them autonomy within our wider parameters of this is what we're going to learn, this is how we're going to learn it, find the route. I'll give you an example of why this is a positive thing that needs to be taught. First day of 8th grade, I'm sifting through, not my 8th grade, my 8th graders, I'm sifting through my cabinets, the annals of this history course in this school. It spans from the 1950s onward. And there's great new age stuff, virtual library, virtual tours of the Gettysburg Battlefield, virtual tours of the Birmingham March. Awesome, great, cool. I find DBQs, discussion-based questions. These are more geared for your juniors and seniors. This is geared towards AP courses. The DBQ project is intensive. It's hard. It's hard for juniors. It's hard for seniors. So I throw it at the 8th graders. First thing we do, the first big DBQ we do is how revolutionary was the Revolutionary War? And they loved it. It went a week, and they did great. 5 months later, I'm reading a book called, I'm blanking on the name. It's by Dr. Joseph J. Ellis. It's called, I forget the name, but it's by a renowned historian. And in that book, he talks about this argument that the American Revolution is often put down because it wasn't all revolutionary at once. We still had slaves. We still had women's suffrage to worry about. We still had the Native American question. And so the American Revolution is often revised as not that revolutionary. Yet we champion the French Revolution for giving all freedoms at once and dismantling the royal family and giving total democracy at whim. But then a reign of terror happens. This is the same question I presented to 8th graders. This intensive question that they flourished in. A renowned historian is writing about in a book. So I'll leave you with that. For us to shift history to match what we see in higher domains, we have to shift our assignments, we have to shift our philosophy. Thank you.